Congratulations! You live in potentially one of the worst times to be a historical researcher or a scientific researcher. What am I talking about? We look around today and we find ourselves in a position to where we apparently have tons of historical information, so much historical information actually, that mainstream historians have been able to put together a comprehensive timeline of human history that goes back 5,000 plus years. Technologically and scientifically speaking, we have access to technology which would have essentially have been considered magical only 100 years ago. Right? We live in one hell of a unique period of time, don't we? To exemplify the situation even more, the vast majority of people today on planet Earth honestly believe that they are living in the pinnacle of human society. Now, why is that? Why do we find ourselves in a position to where your general human honestly believes that they have a really good grasp on everything with respect to existence and how everything in the universe works? And this is essentially true, right? If we look at mainstream science, for example, right, they have really answered all of the major questions that have plagued humanity for as long as we know it exists. Questions like, where did everything come from, right? Mainstream science says the Big Bang. The Big Bang is where everything came from. We have it all figured out. It's all calculated. We have nice little simulations in our computer, and it proves us correct, right? So the mainstream science literally lays claim to having an answer to where existence came from. That's not bad, right? That's not a bad thing to have. That's pretty good, right? And they honestly believe they have it. And for the religious people, the religious side, they're saying, no, that's stupid. That the Big Bang doesn't make any sense. Well, I guess, I take it back. A lot of religious people nowadays would blame the Big Bang on God. All right, so then we're even more screwed. But it's funny, basically anyway, the religious person also finds solace in also believing that they also understand where everything came from, right? The religious person has it figured out in the sense of God. So it's funny, no matter what a mainstream scientist might actually describe, a religious person will always be like, well, yeah, that's fine, but that's just how God would have done it, right? And so they can get away with their side as well, thinking that they have it all figured out. So just right here, just this quick example, we find ourselves in a situation to where humans psychologically honestly believe that they have this grand understanding of where everything came from. And I mean everything, literally everything. And it does not matter if you're on the side of science or if you're on the side of religion. Right? You are placated, you are good, you have it figured out. This is a trivial question, right? It's just simple. There's no problem here. What are you talking about? How could you possibly doubt a magical Big Bang created by a magical God? How could we possibly doubt that? This is the situation that modern humans find themselves having to deal with. What's all this SchIZO stuff that I'm talking about? What the hell am I referring to? Here's the problem that we run into as researchers. And like I said, it does not matter whether you are a historical researcher or a scientific researcher or a religious researcher. Really, it's funny. It's all kind of the same thing, but we'll get into that maybe later. Anyways, it does not matter what field you are currently, diving into and trying to figure out from a research perspective. We all run into the exact same problem. And the problem that we run into is that all of these ideologies, all of this science, all of this history, it is built on top of a false foundation. Now, quick warning before we go any further. I need everybody to understand that on this channel, I do not believe in God. I don't have a religious belief. Nothing like that. So I'm not trying to sell anybody on religion. So if you were wondering if this talk was going to go in a direction that would try to use science, I don't know, to prove religion or whatever crazy stuff they do nowadays. No, because like I said at the beginning of this video, we all have the same problem, right? Everybody is suffering from the same disease. And that disease is the fact that the foundational knowledge in which all of these ideologies are built on, religious, scientific, historic, whatever, right? Doesn't matter. All of these areas of study are all built upon a foundation of lies, half-truths, forgeries, ignorance, either born from willingness or just legitimate, accidental ignorance. We don't know what we don't know. And ultimately, propaganda. Those topics are literally what the foundations of religion, science, and history are based on. And there's nothing to argue here. And I'm going to show you guys what's going on because a lot of people don't look at these topics through the eye of human psychology. Most people, when they get into history, they're not thinking about psychological stuff. They don't, nobody's really going too crazy with that. I mean, a historian, a good historian, will make some sort of a general attempt to maybe try to figure out what people were thinking back in the day. But more often than not, you don't really get that perspective unless you're doing a really insane deep dive into some of the historical stuff. You might get that. But the reality is, when it comes to a mainstream perspective, psychology is not number one on the list for trying to understand what was going on in the past. For example, if you grew up in the West, there's a good chance that not a single historical test that you had to take asked you to do a deep dive into what Julius Caesar was thinking, during all the affairs he was going through, right? You probably never had that question. And if you did, stop being a smartass. You know what I'm saying. This is generally not done in history, right? You maybe at the college level, you find yourself in a position to where maybe a professor is trying to be edgy and he thinks he's smart and, he's going to ask you about the psychological makeup, but he already has everything predetermined in his mind and he's not really going to listen to what you say. Anyway, my main point is that when it comes to looking at history, psychology is not really something we pay attention to. Same thing with general science as well, although we'll apply that a little differently because I realize that psychology is a science and then, we'll use that in a second to do other stuff. Okay. Anyways, my main point is that when we look at whatever subject we are trying to get into out of history, science, and religion, we find ourselves building on top of the work of others that have come before us, don't we? And that makes sense. That's literally how this stuff is supposed to work. Actually, quite literally, that's how all of these topics expand, right? We build on top of the work of others that have come before us. Okay, no kidding. Yeah, I know, that's obvious. Shut up. Okay, so where am I going with this? Here's the point. All of us right now who are alive, I don't think you're dead listening to this, but if you are, that's weird. Anyway, for all of us who are literally in existence right now, every single one of us, when we go to do our research, regardless of the topic, we are building upon those that have come before, right? Obviously. Duh. Okay. I'm repeating myself. I know. Here's the problem. Very often, we will not question the foundation of the knowledge that we are using to build further research on. In fact, it generally never happens, especially in the mainstream. You're never tasked in the academic system to go out of your way and start from complete scratch and rewrite chronology, right? That's not an assignment that you get in any of your classes. All right, maybe there's one or two professors who have ever done this. But it's funny, even if that was done, it didn't matter, right? Even if you had this unbelievably brilliant student who came in and the professor was like, yes, rewrite all of Greek history. Let's see if we can come up with a better way of looking at this. And that student goes out there, does real research, comes back and finds that, yeah, Greek history is wrong, right? It's dated completely incorrectly, and the student, shows all the evidence to prove a different chronology, that teacher's probably just going to give him an F, or he'll give him an A for, effort, but then they'll move on. Nobody is going to look at that paper and change the modern zeitgeist or the chronology of ancient Greece. It's not going to happen, even if that student's paper was flawless, or at least, had potential. Right? It's not going to happen. Why is this? Why is it that we find ourselves in a position in the mainstream to where even if you find evidence that goes a long way into proving something foundational is wrong, why is it ignored? Right? This is our problem when it comes to history. Essentially, everyone who is alive right now has to conform to the current historical foundation. If you do not conform to the historical foundation, what happens to you? Right? You're socially ostracized. You're ridiculed. There's all kinds of ways that the mainstream will come after you, right? They might do it, in just a name-calling kind of way. They can do that, right? They can attack your character, but it can go even as far as taking away your job, right? You losing any kind of social status, forcing you to become an outcast, right? Your entire life could actually potentially be completely destroyed if you find yourself following real evidence to whatever conclusion the evidence leads us to, right? That's a fact. Anywhere you look, you can see countless examples of that. Right? You look at Immanuel Velikovsky, for example. Right? This guy comes out in the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s, I guess, as well. He comes out and completely shows tons of evidence that rewrites history from foundational levels and even changes science as well. Right? He was amazing. And on the science front, don't forget, Velikovsky did exactly what a scientist is supposed to do. He came up with a theory that could possibly happen, and then they went and tested the theory. This would be NASA and other astronomers, and through real science, they actually found out that several, or more than several, of Velikovsky's cosmological scientific predictions were real. Like, they proved it real. So when we look at a scientist, and a scientist is making, a theory, and then we test the theory, and then the theory is proven, right? We call that a really good direction to go. We can look at that scientist and probably say, hey, look, this guy, he's onto something. We should probably pay attention to what he is saying. He's obviously operating in the realm of science. So yeah, let's see what else he's got, and let's change the historical and scientific narrative to fit the new evidence. Like, that's exactly what science is supposed to do, right? What was it? It was Richard Feynman, I think, who said something to the tune of, if observational evidence does not agree with theoretical evidence, you have to discard the theory. Now, I'm paraphrasing that, but you get the point. Right? When we see scientific evidence that shows a completely different direction than what mainstream theory is proposing, what are you supposed to do? Correct, you're supposed to get rid of the theory and move on to what is actually scientifically happening right in front of your face. That is how science is supposed to operate. Unfortunately, this does not happen in the modern age. Today, we find ourselves in a position to where if you do not go along with the established chronology, the established scientific foundation, or even the established religious foundation, religion's a little different here, we'll get rid of that here in a second, but if you do not subscribe to these foundations which existed before you were born, right, you're the crazy one. You're the conspiracy theorist, and ultimately, you are wrong. And you won't be taken seriously by anybody in society. That is the situation we are all living in right now. And this is a scientific fact. This is not some sort of fringe crazy theory. This is not like I just took a bunch of, drank bleach or something and decided to make a YouTube video. No! Right? This is a legitimate, scientifically provable situation that we are currently in as researchers. This ultimately has to beg the question, why? Why is it that right now, when we go to study science or history, we are forced, absolutely required, to adhere to the foundations of those two schools of thought that existed long before you and I were ever born? Right? Why are we not allowed to challenge those foundations? Even worse, why is it a taboo to challenge those foundations? That's not how science works. That is not how any of this is supposed to work. Because the objective fact, and there is no way around this, is that human knowledge is not complete. We know for a fact that we don't know everything. And that's just, I mean, that is an established fact right now. It's extremely easy to prove, no problem. So it's really weird when we look at something like science, when we look at cosmology, and cosmologists have a ready-made answer for an extraordinary question for something like, where did everything come from? Cosmologists, they have a nice little theory all packaged up for you. Here you go. God help you if you question it, right? That's the situation that we fall into. For cosmologists nowadays, you're not allowed to challenge the Big Bang. It doesn't matter if there is now a mountain of evidence literally being found by NASA themselves, proving that the Big Bang absolutely never happened. It doesn't matter. It does not matter what happens. You are required to subscribe to that core belief in the Big Bang. Because if you don't, like I said, what happens? Right? You're kicked out. Does everybody know about Halton Arp? What happened to him when he was doing his cosmological studies with redshift? Halton Arp was another astronomer who got the Velikovsky treatment. He actually discovered the possibility that redshift is intrinsic to stars and does not denote distance. It instead denotes age. And of course, once he made that discovery, and that discovery, by the way, was made with real science, real telescopic views, all of that stuff. You know, this wasn't some crazy theory he woke up, to and started running around naked, screaming on his roof. It's a legitimate, scientific, valid theory. He was immediately pushed out of not only his research institution, he literally got pushed out of his country. He had to go to a different country entirely to continue his work. Right? That should be enough for every single person to doubt all of mainstream science right there. And he's not alone. There's countless people like that. Right? You have another person, somebody like Christian Birkeland. He discovered Birkeland currents, was up for 2 Nobel Prizes. Didn't get either one, not because his theory was garbage, but because of some social dispute with the guy who owns some patents and stuff like that. Main point is that most people have never heard of Christian Birkeland, the guy who discovered what is essentially the foundation of all of cosmology. It's just insane that people ignore his existence. And then, of course, you throw Halton Arp in there, which goes even... Anyway, my point is that right now we know for a fact that mainstream science is 100% not interested in actually discovering real science. And you can see that right now using the James Webb Telescope data and watching how all of these mainstream cosmologists are just floundering. Right? They're doing every imaginative thing they can do to try to keep the Big Bang together because it's being absolutely torn apart. I mean, the concept was stupid in the first place. Really, I mean, the Big Bang, it's like the very second that one guy, I think it was Alan Guth, he did some calculations for the Big Bang, all theoretical trash, and then to make the Big Bang work, and this is what he's celebrated for, he literally inserted this theoretical trash called the free lunch. Okay? There's no such thing as free, all right, in the universe. Everything costs something, but to get the Big Bang to work, he had to inject this free lunch concept to get it to... I mean, the second that was done, it's hilarious that anybody believed that. The fact that mainstream cosmologists literally just grabbed that and was like, oh yeah, really good, oh so smart, oh you're so good, dude, it's insane. That is literally the scientific proof right there. That's all you need to know how crazy the mainstream scientific zeitgeist truly is right now. It's absolutely bonkers. Right? Anyway, so this is where we find ourselves. When we are going to study things, we have to put up with concepts like that. It's stupid. I mean, this is what we have to deal with. And of course, we have to deal with the same thing when it comes to historical foundations. Right now, we have that bastion of truth and knowledge, Wikipedia. And people have no problem going to that objectively corrupt site to gain information about what happened to humans, 3,700 years ago. Because Wikipedia has it all mapped out. And they have it all mapped out because mainstream historians honestly believe that they too have it all figured out. Now, with respect to history, it takes very little to discredit and destroy the mainstream historical narrative. It really does. You can literally put a 7-year-old in front of some of this stuff and they will immediately point out the stupidity in the mainstream foundation when it comes to historical concepts or the historical narrative. So this brings up the question, why is it that we find ourselves in a position to where grown adults on both not only the mainstream side, but also the mainstream alternative research side, why do we find ourselves in a situation to where these otherwise intelligent people are believing what are obviously either lies, forgeries, or information that there is no way you could scientifically prove is real? Real chronology is insane. Real chronology is insane, and it does not line up at all with mainstream historical research. Anyways, we find ourselves in a position as researchers, and it doesn't matter if you're on the mainstream or the alternative mainstream, or even maybe not the mainstream as well on either side, but we find ourselves in a position to where most people honestly believe, either more or less or completely, that what has been established before they got into the arena is correct. Right? They just assume that all of the information that creates that foundation has been vetted, tested, etc. by really good, intelligent, honest people that came before them. That is, of course, ridiculous. Any student of history can point to countless examples within history itself, and I mean within mainstream established history, that there are countless instances of fraud, forgery, all kinds of political lies and garbage flying around. I mean, history is full of this stuff. So it gets really weird when you find a historian looking back at mainstream, history foundations and honestly believing that we have all of that correctly figured out. It boggles the mind. But it also begs the question, how is this possible? How did we get to a point in society, on the planet, and I'll just speak for the western part of the world, but I don't know, this stuff is getting pretty bad everywhere. How did we get to a point to where people are willing to believe obvious lies? Now, this problem is even worse when you think about how it affects your day-to-day life. Modern society has absolutely been augmented. Your life, your personal life, you, your family, your friends, your community, does not matter. All of us have been affected by all of these poisonous foundations which comprise history and science. And this is a fact. If you do not believe me, simply look around at the world today. Now, let's see if we can find a potential solution to the problem that we have in modern day research, and let's see if we can solve it for ourselves so that as we do research, it doesn't matter if it's science or history, as we do that kind of research, we can approach it honestly and with courage. Don't worry about what the mainstream says. Don't worry about what some alternative mainstream person says. Right? I've been harping on mainstream for a little bit, but the alternative mainstream is just as guilty. Right? We a lot of the big players in the alternative mainstream arena, those guys are doing the exact same crime that mainstream is doing. They are pushing narratives that also have no evidence to support them, right? They have no real scientific reason to make the claims that they make. Okay, this is starting to piss me off. All right, so let's get into this. Why do we find ourselves in a situation to where people are willing to believe lies and then take it even further and build their careers and lives on top of lies? Right, this is a serious problem, and it permeates every aspect of our society. So it's worth discussing, looking at, and trying to see if we can come out with a better understanding of why it's happening, so that we can dodge those pitfalls that we're going to run into when we try to piece together real history. So let's set the stage. As I started out earlier in this talk, I gave a few examples of problems that we find when it comes to foundations of, say, history, science, and religion. Right? We have a situation to where science is attempting to offer answers to some of the deepest questions that humans have. Questions like, where did everything come from? Where did humans come from? Where did life come from? Stuff like that. Of course, we also find another institution giving us answers for the same questions as well. We find religion also giving us answers to placate. We find religion also sitting there waiting with answers for us as well. What's the problem with this? Why do I care? Why does this matter? The reason why I'm starting with something like creation, right? The only reason why I'm bringing this up is because every human intrinsically understands at some level or another, that it's an important question to ask and an answer that we would like to actually have. And I don't care what religion you are or what science you believe in or whatever. At the end of the day, I would argue that if you are a human, this is a question that you would like to have an answer to. I honestly believe that. It's like part of being a human. That kind of curiosity, And the reason why you want that answer, interestingly enough, or one of the reasons why, is because that gives you a level of psychological control over your environment. Right? So people, it's like, what do you do with the Big Bang? Nothing. Nobody's making money off the Big Bang. I mean, I guess if you're, I don't know, like Big Bang stuffed animals or something. I don't know. Anyway, nobody's making money off of that. But what does that explanation offer instead? It's got to be valuable for something, right? And it offers a very, very important psychological comfort. That the question of where did everything come from really is a deep one. So if you can provide an answer to a really deep question, that's fairly valuable. But what does that answer do for a human? Right? It's like, okay, great, now I have an answer, then what? Well, like I said, this is messing with you psychologically. What it's doing is that it's killing a certain part of you that would have otherwise kept exploring other possible data points to find the answer. But here is a ready-made answer with a lot of science-y sounding stuff going on around it. And they tell you as well, after they give you the answer, that you don't need to look further, that this is it. And of course, they threaten you with all the stuff that you get threatened with if you do not go along with that answer. So what does that do? That immediately placates a chunk of the human population with respect to critical thinking. And that's extremely valuable if you are looking to control a population. All right? It is. Like, it might not sound like something you think about, right? Most people would never think, oh yeah, the Big Bang is there to help ensure that the population stays under control. That doesn't even make sense. It's crazy. What's wrong with that? But if you think about it. If you are being provided with a primal answer and you accept that answer, suddenly there is an entire part of you that will stop thinking in a very specific direction, an important direction, and now your thoughts will go elsewhere, right? And if you can cut off people from asking the really deep questions and really taking those questions as far as you can go with them, if you can stop that, that actually gives you a very specific level of control over the psychology of a person or of a society. Now, religion does the exact same thing, right? Really, if you don't believe in the Big Bang, right, or whatever, like you're more on the religious side, the God thing does the exact same thing, right? The belief in God gives you an answer to a primal question, and then you move on. Right, now, atheists love to use this talking point, right? It's all about control. Yeah, and you're right. Well, it's not all about control. Like, it was exploited for control. Let's say that. That's a better way to put it historically. Because there was a lot of stuff that wasn't necessarily written to be used as a psychological control method. Some of this stuff was literally just recording stories or, fable-inspired stories, right? There's no reason to think that every single page of the Bible, for example, is completely designed for psychological control. That's a misnomer. There's no reason to believe that, and that's not what happened. But that does not mean that it cannot be exploited to obtain psychological control over people. And I guess this is the main point of the talk. The reason why we are not on the right track in history and science is because nowadays the vast majority of people have been psychologically conditioned to not ask certain questions. They have been psychologically conditioned to believe answers which have no validity in reality. Now, before you think that I'm talking from some, high pulpit place of godliness and I'm just above all of this, I am not. I have the exact same programming that everybody else has, right? And I the same stuff. Most of the stuff that, we laugh at nowadays that people believe in, I believed in some of that, right? There are crazy, like, I used to believe in evolution, hands down, no questions, never questioned it, but I believed in it, right? God didn't do it, obviously. Oh, we must have evolved from monkeys somehow. All right, fine. Smarter people than me are doing that, so okay, fine, I'll believe it. Growing up, I never questioned evolution because of the way it was taught. Same thing with like the Big Bang for a scientist or the, whatever creation story you have on the religious side. When you're born, this is the stuff you are taught. And this is where the problems start for everybody. When we are born and we grow up in a society as kids, we are taught the stuff that society considers to be real, right? We are taught either the religious aspects of that society or what happened or the scientific aspects or a mixture of both. The point is that you as a kid grow up not being able to choose what you want to learn. You just get to absorb everything that's around you. And of course, being a child, this is your formative years for psychology. So when you pick up on all of this stuff, a lot of these things become unquestionable to you as an adult for no other reason than that is what you have been trained to believe. Now, a lot of people don't want to hear this, but we have to go over some of the basic realities of human psychology so that we can understand what's being done to people right now, people like you and me, and what's going to continue to be done to future generations if we don't step up now and start making real changes. And I mean like real changes, really fighting back. Because right now, and I'm going to stick to history mostly, our history is being rewritten, right? And it's not just one or two cultures' histories that are being rewritten right in front of everybody's face. It's all cultures. There is not a single culture right now that the mainstream is not twisting, shredding, and augmenting to change it to get it to fit into their preconceived chronology. This is happening right in front of our faces. And even worse, we actually have sections of society cheering this on. That is how disgusting this world is right now. We have people on this planet who are willing to cheer and be happy to watch items and cultures, histories be destroyed. Right? We live in that world now, right? And it's not weird, right? This is something that most people seem to be completely fine with. Because if they weren't fine with it, they would step up, right? Right? You would step up and stop this. Yeah, that's not happening either, is it? These are the kinds of things that we have to acknowledge that we are all doing right now. Like right now, as you listen to this, you're doing everything I just said. You are not stepping up and fighting back. You are not doing anything to try and stop the physical destruction of history. Right? It's not happening. So what's going on? How is it that people are allowing their histories to be destroyed? Right? What's going on? It's crazy, right? If you take a step back and you look at it objectively, that concept is crazy. There is no reason to destroy anybody's history. I don't care what history it is. History is there for us to learn from. But if it's being destroyed, how are future generations supposed to learn? Right? And that's key, because that is exactly what they're trying to do. They want to control what people learn. Now, before we go further with this and get too crazy, I'm using the term they already, right? Who the hell are they, right? You conspiracy theory, nut job, they. It's really important to understand that the word they works really well, because when I say they are trying to change things, this can be anybody from the guy at the 7-Eleven counter, who sells you your Monster or whatever, to, the president or some banker of the world. It doesn't matter what level of society you're on, right? It's irrelevant. Every human has the potential to want to augment the way other people think. And in this case, we're going to talk about history. So it's not just people at the very, very top that would want to control history. Obviously, you would want to do that. I think if anybody argues that people at the very, very top who have access to the amount of resources that they do would not exploit people's stupidity and not rewrite history, you're insane. Like whoever thinks that would never happen, that person is just gone. I mean, that person is psychologically toast. Their brain is fried. Of course they would do it. Why wouldn't they do it? Right? And the only reason why people think they wouldn't is because people have no analogous experience at that level to understand that it could be done. Right? Nobody here is friends with any of the people who run the Federal Reserve. Right? You don't live in that world. They live in a completely different world. Anyways, the main point is when I say the word they, I'm not just talking about some crazy high-level people. I'm talking about anyone who benefits from controlling the message. And anybody can benefit. Like I said, it does not matter what level of society you are on, right? This will happen. So when I say they are trying to change things, it could be almost anybody. Now, and it can be, but it's not everybody, obviously. More often than not, it's relative to history. Relative to historical studies, right? I'm going to stick to history. I'm not going to go crazy. But relative to history, of course, there are people on this planet at all levels of society that could benefit from having you believe something that isn't true. It's not weird, right? I mean, back in the day, during the Renaissance period, this was rampant, right? Forgeries, lies, the control of chronology was extremely important to a lot of different organizations for the sole fact that it allowed them to gain power through the use of forgeries, right? And this is a scientific historic fact, right? That's just the reality. And of course, nowadays we are feeling the effects of a lot of that stuff that took place, right? There is a lot of people in positions of power nowadays who never should have been in it at all, right? If we are operating on a real honest society, we would not be living the way we live, obviously. But you get my point, right? Okay. Right, so, but this is what we find ourselves in. We find ourselves in a poisonous society that is going out of its way to try and rewrite history at multiple levels. So if you're a historical researcher, which, I mean, I guess you're here, so I would imagine you're a historical researcher like me. Right? We're all historical researchers. We have to be cognizant about the reality of what we are dealing with. And I don't believe that a lot of people want to admit the position that we are in. So what happened? Why is it that we find ourselves in a position to where people are so willing to believe a fraudulent historical foundation And not only believe that, but build on their own research on top of that fraudulent foundation. I mean, and it's objectively fraudulent, right? And I've done plenty of shows about some of that stuff, and we'll do a ton more. Because when it comes to history, the reality is we don't know anything. I mean, and that in and of itself is insane. The fact that humans can barely recall what happened, say, 600 years ago, and I mean truly recall it, right? Don't start linking me books and saying, oh yeah, but this guy in the Renaissance wrote this. Yeah, you have to prove that that is valid, and I want scientific proof that that book actually happened. And of course, this is where your average historian will just try and cite even more random authors to prove their point, while at the same time, I'm still sitting there waiting for real, scientifically tested evidence that proves that that book is 100% accurate. In history, unfortunately, most are all text. Holy crap. Basically, in history nowadays, all ancient texts are considered 100% authentic and real unless proven otherwise. And of course, a lot of the times it's going to be impossible to prove that any of that stuff is a forgery or a half-truth or whatever, because there's no evidence for it either way. And the reason why is simple, right? The second law of thermodynamics exists. A lot of stuff has just degraded and, disappeared. Of course, there's also malicious intent. People who have gone out of their way to destroy evidence. For example, the Renaissance is hilarious. Or that period between, say, I'll be generous, between like 1100 and, say, late 1600s, early 1700s. That entire area, we find a situation to where all of these magical history books magically appear. And they have all the answers that everybody was looking for at that specific period of time. And what's even funnier is when people back in the day would challenge these books, right? They would challenge the authenticity. They would say something like, okay, let me see the original, bro, because 99% of the time, the original book was not presented, right? It was a copy of the original book that was presented. And so what would happen is people would demand the original, and of course, the original magically vanished. Oh, it burned down yesterday in the church. Okay, what? My mom ate it. Like, what the hell's going on here, right? It's just like, what's going on? But that is exactly what happened, and that's actually a historical fact. Right? That's not even something that mainstream historians argue about. So it's funny that they actually believe anything that comes out of that period. It's absolutely insane. But it's that insanity that I want to discuss really fast. And I know we're like 10 hours into this, and I haven't even really gotten to the topic. You get the point. I've set the stage. Let's just get to it. Why are we in this position? The answer is ultimately simple. And I'm talking about today, you and me today, our position, not people back in the 1700s, although some of this is going to be true as well for those people. But anyways, the reason why we find ourselves believing a lot of this nonsense, all of us, is because we have been psychologically conditioned to believe those things. That's it. We have been told that this stuff is correct our entire lives, and that is why we have no problem believing that the stuff is real, and why we have a huge problem in trying to change our point of view. Now, this is where stuff can get dark, but I'm going to go through it anyways, and some of this might be weird to hear. I won't go too crazy, but in my opinion, if you are going to understand history, and if you're going to understand what's going on right now in history, you need a basic fundamental understanding of how human psychology operates in reality. I'm not talking about, the pseudo garbage you probably find on, some social media place or something like that. There's all kinds of pseudo psychological garbage out there. And none of that stuff ever touches upon the truth and the realities of how the human mind can be affected and, unfortunately, ultimately controlled. Oh, here we go. SchIZO stuff. Let me guess, you think everybody has been brainwashed and we're all sheep. Well, I mean, scientifically speaking, you can make those arguments. And you can make that argument from science. Here, let's do this really fast. Let's do a quick thought experiment. at the beginning of this show, I gave an example of the Big Bang. General science, they believe that that concept is true. And most people who are not religious, or even those who are religious, believe that this is the answer to where everything came from. My question to you is why? Why is it that you believe that that is the answer? What amazing scientific experiment did you do that convinced you that this is the truth? What amazing evidence was presented to you that was incontrovertible and that convinced you that it's real? What is the evidence? This is only if you believe in the Big Bang, obviously. What is it? What made you a believer? Because I know you haven't been to the center of the universe. I know you haven't been out in space running experiments. So how the hell did you come to this scientific conclusion that what these people are saying is true? The only reason, and this is the reality, this is the truth. The only reason why you believe, or anybody believes, that the Big Bang actually happened is because they have been trained to believe it. That's it. That's literally the only reason. If we were in an honest society, right now the Big Bang would have already been discarded. It would have been discarded probably decades ago anyway. But now, especially with the mainstream's own evidence, like proving all that wrong, they're still holding on to it. But the reality is the ridiculousness of the claim of the Big Bang was evident right from the beginning. And don't forget, there was a lot of people, a lot of really high-level, hardcore, real astronomers who are absolutely against the theory because it was stupid. It made no sense. Like, what are you talking about? And like I already said earlier on, also, this show, whatever, is that the entire concept is just theoretical garbage that you literally have to just play imagination games with to make it work, at least relative to our current understanding of physics. Now, I say that last little bit because I want to be intellectually honest with everybody. The Big Bang as a concept is indeed ridiculous, but at the same time, do we know everything that's going on in the universe? No, so I cannot 100% conclusively say that the Big Bang didn't happen, but it really does fall into the same category of a theory is if I said something like, well, there was a bunch of marshmallow men and they built the universe and then they expanded it by stretching it like taffy, but you can't see them because they're outside. But, look at it. We see the expansion, right, bro? It's all taffy. I can make that claim and it has the exact same validity as the Big Bang. It really does. The point is that the theory of the Big Bang, there's no reason to take it seriously. There's no reason to waste your time on it. Right? One of the problems and what happens is that when a concept gets established in somebody's psyche as real, regardless of the validity, that person will tend to do everything that they can to fit in their observations with that particular theory. And that is exactly what we are finding. Now, the good news here is it's even funnier because you can go online right now and just prove this to yourself. Right? Cosmologists are literally scrambling and running around trying to figure out what the data means. Yeah, it means that the Big Bang never happened. Like, that's it. I just answered the question. Where's my damn Nobel Prize? I literally just figured it out for you. I will take the money and I will stop making stupid YouTube videos. Right? That is my blackmail. Otherwise, the videos will continue. Right? But that's it. There's no reason to entertain theories that have no evidence to support them, right? There should be other better theories being upheld right now or chased after instead of the Big Bang, right? But that's not happening. The reason why it's not happening is because, like I said, we've been conditioned to do it. But how do we do this? How do you condition a human to believe in something that is objectively false? And this is where the darker parts of the human mind, unfortunately, come into play. And every single one of us, me, you, your mom, whoever, we have all fallen prey to psychological programming that has been injected into our society by people who have been doing this for a while now. Never forget that the human mind is science, right? Biologically, science. Psychologically, science. Understanding of consciousness and the brain, science. There has been a lot of research poured into understanding how the hell a human works, And unfortunately, to make it worse though, there's been a lot of research, probably more resources as well, poured into understanding how you can manipulate and control the human mind. Right? And you can find all kinds of papers on this all over the world, right? This is a legitimate scientific situation. You can find tons of evidence for all the stuff we're about to talk about that proves that it's real. Everything I say, by the way, that we're about to go over, it's all based on science. This is not a conspiracy theory at all, right? There's nothing made up here. Everything we are going to discuss, I know 1 year in this episode or whatever, everything, and I mean everything we are going to talk about is established science. So at the end of this, if you stick around, it's all right, you can leave, I don't care. I'm about to leave too, this sucks. No, I'll keep going, okay. If you stick around, you're going to find that a lot of the stuff that we talk about is going to literally sound insane, almost. You won't believe some of it. But once again, I don't know what to tell you. Even in the clear net, the regular world, you can find tons of evidence that will support all of these claims. What you won't generally find without digging a little deeper is how this stuff is utilized on you. Right? You're the victim. I'm the victim. Don't forget that. Right? You are being attacked every day of your life. All right, anyway. So how do we get to this point? Well, the first problem that we all have to deal with as researchers is that we all grew up, within a certain kind of a society and with certain kinds of information. In the West, you're either taught, God made the universe, or you're taught that the Big Bang happened, or both simultaneously, and you're fine with that, right? This is drilled into your head. When you are taught this, ask yourself a question. I mean, what evidence was really presented to you that unequivocally proved that this was the truth, and what made you decide to believe that it was the truth? Because remember, at the end of the day, it's still you ultimately deciding to go along with something, right? That's still a thing. So we'll get there. What was the evidence? What did it for you? Ask yourself that question, and I mean it honestly, because I think you'll find it very interesting that when you ask yourself that question and you stay objective, and maybe even throw in some other critical thinking questions like why was this even told to me, right? Like what? Why was anyone even telling me this? I didn't ask about it. What the hell's going on? Right? Maybe you asked about it, but not everybody. And I know. What was the killer for you? Right? And most people are going to answer nothing. I was just told in school or by my parents or by the mainstream people on the internet or TV that this is the truth. And that's how most people are going to answer that question. The reality is you probably never had a chance or was never offered an alternative theory that could explain the beginning of everything. Right? You were given two choices, essentially. In some cases, you were only given one choice, and of course, as a kid, you aren't going to be able to do anything about any of that. And it's not because you're stupid, it's not because you're an idiot, it's because you're a kid. Biologically speaking, obviously, as a kid and you're growing up, that's your time to learn everything. And if somebody can control what you're learning, what happens? Well, of course, your brain will literally form in a direction that will reinforce these ideas which are scientifically invalid, right? Because your brain isn't sitting there asking all these amazing scientific questions because your brain doesn't know how to ask those questions yet. It doesn't even know certain questions can even be asked, right? That's what being a kid is all about. Right? You're growing up, you are forming. And if people can get a hold of you psychologically while your brain is forming, they can literally control how you will tend to think in the future as an adult, right? Biologically speaking, for the brain, when you're growing up, your brain is literally malleable. Like it physically will build connections towards whatever psychological tendencies you have. So a lot of people think that they can just kind of change on the fly psychologically. You can kind of do that, but depending on the subject, you actually have to physically remold your brain to fully get out of whatever psychological conditioning you grew up accepting. Now, I get it. You can shoot back really fast and say, but wait a second. I mean, the belief in the Big Bang is not really psychological conditioning. It's just no, it's literally psychologically conditioning. When you are growing up as a child, everything you learn is literally categorized as psychological conditioning. That is what's going on. For example, when you go and you try to learn something for a test, right? You're studying. Studying is just a form of psychological conditioning. You are just psychologically conditioning yourself to memorize certain pieces of information. That is exactly what's going on. So let's take it to the next level. What if somebody could control the kind of information that you are trying to memorize? What would happen? Right? This is how easy it is. Now, the reality is, in modern day, with the internet, TV, music, everywhere you go in modern Western society, you are being bombarded with psychological controlling propaganda. That is literally what all of this stuff going on around you is designed to do. Like, let's look at a base level, just in case you don't believe me in what I'm saying. Think about what a commercial is. Think about what an ad is. There are literally positions now in companies whose entire job is to convince you to buy something you do not need. They will accomplish this through various psychological conditioning methods. That's exactly what a commercial or an ad is. Some of the tactics that they use would be something like they create a catchphrase, or they make a catchy little jingle, or they have a character that you get to know, and they constantly talk to you and say and repeat the exact same message over and over again. That is psychological conditioning tactics 101. And this is being done to everybody. Now, not everybody, but I get it. A lot of people out there are going to say, yeah, that stuff doesn't work on me. I'm immune to all of that, bro. No, you're not. No, you're not. 100%. No, you're not. You have absolutely purchased things that you never needed. I guarantee it. It's impossible. Like, our society is now literally based upon people consuming garbage, right? And the reason why people do that, even though it's obvious garbage, right? How much stuff do you buy, or how much stuff do you own that you actually need, right? Need, not want, need. Most of it you don't need, right? You only got it because you felt like you had to have it. And the reason why you felt that was because of psychological conditioning practices. Now let's go over to the historical foundation area. This is basically what has been done to researchers, just on an academic level. So over time, over the past few hundred years, chronology started to become important. Suddenly people were trying to figure out, hey, we really need to figure out a chronology of what happened in the past, why we are where we are now, and keep it going, right? And that's a good thing. There's nothing wrong intrinsically with that. The problem is the people who initially started to do it, I guess I should say the people who successfully did it in the mainstream. I guess that's the better way to say it. But the scholars who ended up driving mainstream chronology, those guys ended up not being what we would call honest individuals. Unfortunately, right? We can go back in time, we can look at the Scaliger-Petavius situation. That is essentially what mainstream chronology is built on top of. That and the Bible, oddly enough. So if you're an atheist and you believe in mainstream chronology, congratulations. You think the Bible is 100% real. That's what we deal with. Anyway, but the chronology that got propagated ultimately was a really corrupt chronology, right? And this, it's really important to understand that people back in the day, when they saw the original chronology being composed by Scaliger, they called him out on it. There were good people back then that said, no, this guy's crazy, his chronology is wrong. The only reason why it's taught today is because certain institutions latched on to this chronology and they had a lot of power, so they were able to integrate it into general society. Now, once that chronology was created, it took some time to get established. It was not immediately spread all throughout the world, within, a decade or whatever of these guys coming up with this chronology. It took time to propagate. So what happened is that even though the initial chronology was technically wrong, it was crazy, right? The Scaliger-Petavius chronology is absolutely insane. So any legitimate criticisms of that chronology just died off with the people who were, championing that point of view. It's funny, there's a saying in science that goes something like, science progresses one death at a time. What do they mean by that, right? Well, what they're trying to say when somebody says that is that you need the people who are holding on to the old paradigms to literally die off before any future progress can be made. And the reason why is because so long as a person who holds a position of authority is around, for whatever reason, well, it's all psychological reasoning, really, at the end of the day, but if that person is in an important authoritative position and they are perpetuating something that is, objectively wrong, but if you are not allowed to challenge that person's station, right, what happens, right? Nothing changes. So you have to literally wait for that dude to die before hopefully you can try and get some sort of new progress. The same thing here with history. The only problem with history is that it went in the exact opposite direction. So once Scaliger died off, what happened? Well, Petavius took over, and Petavius started adding on to his chronology. What was unfortunate about Petavius taking over is that Petavius committed the exact same crimes that Scaliger did. He just built upon them, right? But to make matters worse, Scaliger was a Jesuit, and of course, Jesuits had tremendous amounts of power during this particular period of time. I mean, they were like, they're essentially literally the Pope's foot soldiers. So, Petavius is over here writing a history that will absolutely benefit the church. And that is exactly what happens during this period of time. We know this for a scientific fact, right? We have all of the forgeries. We saw what happened. We have the confessions. And of course, we have the outcomes as well. Now, calm down, Jesuits. Don't come after me just yet. I'm not talking crap about you guys. I'm just saying what happened, all right? A lot of people don't know that this is what went down, and it did, all right? So, they got a victory. They won there. Now, of course, your average historian who does not want to face these facts, the facts of that the vast majority of the sources that they cite nowadays are all essentially suspect at the very least, but the reality is the vast majority of the works nowadays that historians use to paint a picture of antiquity are actually all fraudulent. And that is not just me making something up. I did not just snort a line of cocaine and then do a bunch of shots of vodka off of my stupid neighbor who keeps coming over trying to borrow money. No, I did not do that. There's actually mainstream historians who are literally willing to make the claim that 90+% of the material that historians cite for painting a picture of antiquity and earlier are quite literally all forgeries. And that's not me. That's literally mainstream historians. But isn't that interesting that you never hear their side of the history or the historical research when you go to learn about something like ancient Rome or ancient Greece or any of that stuff over there, right? You're just not, you never get that perspective. Now, from a scientific perspective, that's ridiculous. Because if we are going to approach history from a scientific, using the scientific method, we have to have as many sides as possible. We have got to look at all of the evidence, and that's not done. And not only is it not done, but it's not even, nobody even asks for it nowadays, right? It's not just the mainstream historians that don't go out of their way to look for other bits of evidence. No, it's everybody. I mean, it's literally the vast majority of the Western world. So the real question that, we run into at this point then is how the hell did this happen? How did we get to a point to where intelligent historians are buying into lies? How do we get to a point to where the general public doesn't care and they just listen to an authoritative figure and nod their head and say, oh yeah, I believe you. It's all good. Nah, bro, don't show me the evidence. I'm fine. I'm just going to keep playing video games or, scrolling through social media, right? And this brings us to our core problem. Psychological conditioning tactics have played a huge role in propagating all of this stuff, right? And it completely permeates every aspect of history. It literally does not matter what area of history you study, it's everywhere. You could be studying Vietnam history, same stuff is going on there. Hell, in fact, you can even go read papers nowadays that was studying the psychological tactics that were used against the American public to make sure that certain things happened, that certain images of the war were propagated throughout society, etc. I mean, it's everywhere. It literally does not matter what era of history you focus on. But this is important to think about, because when we start looking, I'm going to focus on ancient history, right? We're not talking about World War II or Vietnam here. When we look back in ancient history, we are already at a severe disadvantage. And we all know that. I mean, you should know that. If you're studying ancient Egypt and you think you have all of it locked down, I mean, come on, man, not in a million years. Because the reality is you don't have any of the evidence that's really required to make the kinds of claims that are being made right now. And I don't care if it's alternative history or mainstream history. We all have the same problem. There's no way around it. So we are already at a disadvantage when it comes to studying history. Just imagine how much more screwed we are when we look at the psychological programs being injected into the historical sciences. And it is absolutely happening. So when we go to study some aspect of history, it doesn't matter, what's one of the first things that most people are going to go and do? They're going to go and approach an authoritative figure on the subject. And that's not bad. There's nothing wrong with that concept, because you would hope that the people who are in these positions of power and hold this knowledge would be, honest. They would want to share this with you. They would want to explain to you what's going on. And all of the stuff that they tell you should hopefully be generally real, right? It should be tested, tried, true. It should be accurate. And of course, once again, the psychological conditioning in the world also programs you to believe that those authorities are just that yes, they are telling the truth. Of course, the programming has also made sure that if you do not agree with that you will be ostracized, right? There's already an element of psychological punishment, even at the most basic level. How do you like that? Even before you do anything, you have already been pre-programmed to understand the punishment for you questioning that authority, right? That's what we call passive psychological conditioning output, by the way. That would be something that you do on your own. I'm not sitting, or I should not me. There's not some guy following you around with a gun to your head saying, if you do not believe that professor, then I'm going to kill you, right? That's not happening. You are self-policing yourself. Right? And that's one of the beauties of psychological programming, by the way, is that you have that kind of control over a person. You can have a person self-govern themselves within the laws that you have decided to program into them, right? That's how that works. Okay, I know. All right. So anyway, so when you go to those authorities, you expect them to be truthful. The funny part about this is those authorities, generally speaking, are going, when, whatever they do tell you, they are honestly going to believe that they are telling you the truth. This is where it gets weird. Because the people who are in most of these academic positions, not everybody, don't get me wrong, there are definitely people at the higher levels that know exactly what they're doing, and they're perpetuating this stuff for, well, they know what they're doing. Let's just keep it like that. But the vast majority of people have no clue that they are perpetuating lies. So when you go to talk to a history professor about ancient Egypt, and he has no problem telling you about, all of these dynasties and kings lists and all of that stuff, he believes it's real. Right? Even though scientifically speaking, there's no reason to believe anything he just said is true. What's going on? How is this possible? That guy is not stupid. Why is he believing a lie? The reason why he is believing that lie and propagating it is simply because he has been programmed to do it. His entire life, he has done nothing but ingest psychological programming at all kinds of levels that blanket society. Right? Remember, it's not just one program that we all get. There are literally thousands of different programs that are operating within all of us all the time. And these programs, they do all kinds of stuff, right? There's self-policing programs, there's active programs. I mean, that's like 10,000 other shows in and of itself. Now, and this is where stuff gets really schizo, right? And why do you think this sounds schizo? If you thought it was schizo, why do you think this sounds schizo? You only believe this is schizo because you have been programmed to believe that this kind of a subject is schizo. Right, and it's your job to mock it, deride it, not believe it, completely get rid of the person who's talking about it, etc., etc. Right? That's what the programming is there to do. All right. Anyway, I know my programming is all crazy now. What the hell? Where am I going with this? That's a good question. What the hell are we talking about? Right? We're over an hour. We've gone on long enough with this. So let's keep talking because I'm not done yet. So when we look at the mainstream historical institution, we find people who have been placed into these institutions because they have been the best recipients and executors of the programming, right? If you want to get a professorship in a university nowadays, you got to play the game. Everybody knows that you have to play ball. And of course, there's the social aspect, and then, there's the criteria. But ultimately, the reason why a professor is going to get the job is because they are willing to propagate the programming. And that's it. I mean, that is ultimately what is going on. You are not getting free thinking people, especially nowadays. It might have been different, the further we go back in time, it would have been different here or there. And I'm not saying that the entire, scholastic academic system is completely corrupt yet. But you could probably make an argument that 95+% of it is completely locked down. I mean, you're not going to go to college and you aren't going to get a class on chronology that says, oh, hey, by the way, all those dates that you learned in high school and maybe some classes before this about, ancient Greece and, 300 BC and the Hellenistic period, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, all that's wrong. That's all complete garbage. We're going to look at the real evidence and we're going to try to follow that and see where it takes us. You are not going to find that. Now, this begs the next question is why is this happening? Wouldn't people want to know the truth? And yeah, of course people want to know the truth. That's probably one of the main reasons why you got involved in history. You just want to know the truth. That's why that's the only reason why I care. Well, not the only reason, but that's one of the core principles about learning real history is to learn the truth about where we came from. Right? Ultimately, like where did all of this human garbage come from? How the hell did we wind up in the situation that we're in right now? History can teach us all that. Now, there are people at the top that are well aware of this. These people know that if you can make a connection to your ancestors, that actually strengthens human bonds, physically and psychologically. Ultimately, it's the psychological aspect. Well, they care about the physical too, obviously, because they're pumping our food full of garbage. By the way, anybody who cares about politics, if you think any politician cares about you, go see which ones are actively doing anything to stop all the poisons being put in the food around this planet. You will find 0 politicians doing this. That is all the proof you need that every single one of those people are corrupt and they do not care about you. Okay, that's a side note, I know, but that just pisses me. Okay, anyway, so the people at the top, they are well aware that if you start to understand real history, you will make a connection to your ancestors. And from that point on, you can actually then start to build a real community. Not just build a community with your general family and those around you, but you also have the potential to build stronger bonds with people who are outside of your community. That is what these people fear the most. This is what they do not want happening. They do not want everyone on this planet looking around at everybody else and going, oh, hey, look, we're all in this crap together. We need to stop the people doing this, right? That's exactly what they don't want to happen. It's funny. You know, you could actually make the argument that at the very base level, the number one thing that these people do want to make sure they have under control is our history, right? And I don't know if I've said it in this show yet or not, but the principle stands, right? That Orson Welles quote of, you know, he who controls the past controls the future. He who controls the present controls the past. Yeah, it's true. People don't think about this kind of stuff anymore, once again, because they've been conditioned not to. People all over this world have been psychologically weakened to ensure that they don't ask the real questions and that they don't take the real answers seriously if they run into them. Ultimately, what this does is this establishes a very deep level of control within the human psyche. And then, of course, once you add more controlling programs, you can then pull more strings. And then once you can pull more strings, you know, you can essentially do almost whatever you want. I mean, look around at society right now. There are people all over this planet now doing the most insane stuff for no other reason so that somebody will hit that little like button like under their video or picture or whatever the hell dumb crap they're doing. Like, and that is a kind, by the way, of social programming. That is a type of psychological conditioning that they are messing with. Unfortunately, that particular kind of conditioning also plays with the physical aspect of the brain, right? So, really quick, just yeah, I know it's not really doesn't have anything to do with history, but one of the techniques that is used is that if you can control a person's dopamine hits that a person will naturally create biologically, you actually have a lot of control over that person. And that's exactly why social media is the way it is nowadays. And I get it, that sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory, but I believe at this point in time that we've had social media long enough, you can see what's being done. And maybe this isn't really all that off topic, because if you don't believe me on all this stuff going on, I mean, really go look at social media. That's the best scientific area you can look at, and you can watch how people react. You can literally watch the ebb and flow of psychology, and you can watch the system at the top inject various kinds of subjects into the social media environment that will create very specific outcomes. Right? That is going on right now, and there's no real way to argue it. And once again, you can find all kinds of scientific papers on this as well. I'm not the only person who has noticed this, right? This is very obvious to anybody who studies psychology. Now, whether or not that particular psychologist wants to admit what's going on is another story, because there is a really good chance that they are also on social media being played, being played for fools. I'll just keep it at that, right? The psychological community is unbelievably corrupt because no one's allowed to talk about the kind of stuff that we're talking about here. I'm not going to go into any of that stuff, but it's hilarious that the psychological community, they literally try to say that multiple personality, MPD, or DID, dissociative identity disorder, doesn't exist. They honestly try to make everybody sound crazy if you try to study that phenomena. And we know for a fact it exists. It's all over the place. You can even, anyway, okay, that's a whole other thing. And no, I am not suffering from DID. No, this is not a problem I have. Okay, I know, I've lost the track. Okay, we're talking about history, things that piss me off. Oh yeah, the mainstream institutions. Okay, so you get it, right? So if we have high-level institutional authorities running programs inside of themselves, and then of course propagating the programs to new people, like, what kind of position does that put us in? It puts us in a screwed up one. But and the reason why it's so messed up is because people will literally lose the ability of self-awareness. They will no longer have any kind of critical thinking skills, even though they are operating at the highest levels of academia. If you can neutralize self-awareness and critical thinking skills, which has been done through and through in today's age. I never thought that this was possible. I gave humans way too much credit when I was young. I figured that humanity could never get to the point that it is right now because humans aren't that stupid, right? Humans, there's a point to where every human would be able to identify what they're seeing as a net negative. I'll just be polite. And put a stop to it. Of course, that is not what is happening right now. And it's not what's happening in the mainstream historical arena. So if we have people like this who are blindly proselytizing, is that a word, proselytizing? I'm saying it, proselytizing. If they're blindly saying all of this stuff and they're injecting their programming into the kids, into the students, what kind of position does that put us in? It puts us in a position that if you are looking for the truth, you literally have to deal with a physical and psychological army that is primed and ready to stop you from moving forward and discovering the truth. That's a good way to probably end this because I've been talking for 10 million, whatever, hour, whatever. If you're still listening to this, what is wrong with you? You need to seek psychological help. And I'm here to help you out. Let's keep going. I'm not done talking yet. All right, so so anybody who is actually looking for the truth, we're all on the same side. Now, of course, this is what the mainstream fears. They're not interested in people banding together and following a completely different kind of chronology. In this case, we'll stick to history. I'm not going to get crazy. They don't want that, because if people really do start to figure out what happened in the past, then everything is going to change for the people at the top. At the very least, like I said, you don't need a conspiracy theory to go crazy with this. All you need is basic human greed and the lust for power. So if somebody obtains a high level of power, do you honestly think that person is going to relinquish that power just because some little dude on the internet found the truth? And I'm not saying that little dude is me. I'm just saying anybody who finds the truth. Do you honestly believe that multi-bajillionaire who, they literally make the money and they control it all, they're not going to be like, oh, you figured out the truth? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me reset all of this horrible stuff that I've done. Oh, and you've got the truth, so let me just hand it over to you now. That is not going to happen. These people in these positions of power are going to want to maintain the power, and they are. And psychological programming is one of the main number one ways it is done. In fact, it is the number one way. I don't know if you could argue anything else. I don't think you could do it. Psychological control is number one. Because once you have that, you own the person, right? You own the person physically once you own them psychologically. All right, so that puts us in a crappy position, doesn't it? Because if we're looking for the truth, we're not going to have access to a lot of the resources that would help us find that truth. What I'm saying is that if you're a scientist and you have some ideas for something that the particle accelerator could help you prove, but what you are trying to prove is completely against the mainstream, you're not getting any time on that machine. Same thing with history. If you're an archaeologist or you want to be an archaeologist and you want to make digs in areas that might potentially possess the artifacts that will change everything, you're not getting permission to do that. Like right now in Egypt, nobody is doing any kind of archaeology unless it's probably under the table. Or no, it is under the table at this point. I don't know how many real archaeological expeditions are taking place right now because they have locked it down. Right? You don't lock something down unless you have something to hide. And of course, I know, they use the excuse, we don't want to damage things. Oh, shut up! It's stupid. You guys, they've destroyed so much. They have literally destroyed the Sphinx. And now they're talking about destroying the pyramids by restoring them. Restoration is probably one of the worst things that could ever happen to an archaeological site. 100%. Okay. Anyway, so what we are up against then is we are up against a literal army of people who will never change their mind. This psychological programming, and maybe you've noticed this, really creates a person who is closed-minded. They don't have self-awareness anymore. They have lost the ability to truly critical think at the levels required of a real historian or of a real chronologist. Like, that stuff is gone, and you see that, right? And we've all dealt with that to one degree or another, right? You know, it's obvious that something's not quite right with, say, Egypt, and you're like, well, I don't know, man, maybe, really? Can you prove that to me? What, you don't believe me? Well, if you don't believe me, you're a conspiracy theorist, right? They don't actually give you any scientific information to change your mind. They just immediately go to attacking your personage. That's another psychological trick. So what's going on right here at the end of the day within the historical community is that we have created, they have created a situation of divide and conquer. And they've done it through psychological conditioning practices. We should all start taking shots every time I say psychological conditioning, and then we'll die, and then none of this will matter anymore. And we will never have to listen to another one of these videos, which is now over an hour long, and we are going to keep going, okay? Because I got a few more things to say, and then we'll shut up, okay? So, why is this part important then? All right, we get it. That stuff sucks. We know we face that, and now you know why you face that. And I'm going to do more shows on that, because this subject, the psychological programming aspect of humanity, is amazing. And the way it has affected history, and the way it has been used throughout history. This is not a new phenomena to you and me today, or just in the past century. Psychological conditioning practices have been tested for, literally centuries, more than likely millennia, right? And that's different. Yeah, we should do a show about that one day. Okay, anyway. What we have to watch out for now, though, is that a lot of people will say, well, I'm not psychologically programmed, bro. I'm on the alternative research side. And then you're like, okay, well, who built the pyramids? And then they'll be like, aliens. And it's like, no, like that is also psychological conditioning. This might sound weird, but so it's really easy, technically speaking, to point out a mainstream psychologically controlled person. Not a problem. Very simple. You can basically point to anybody, all right? Almost. But when it comes to the alternative arena, all of us, we think we have broken out of a lot of that. We honestly, because I'm not part of that. I have not broken out of most of this. Most people, though, will believe that they have risen above all of this psychological conditioning programming. They may not realize that that is what it is, but so they will simply say, well, I'm not a sheep, right? Those are sheeple over there. I'm not a sheep, right? But then that same person will turn around and go turn on Netflix and watch Graham Hancock do his song and dance, right? Those kind of people permeate the alternative research community as well. What people don't understand is that these people are playing both sides. They're playing, obviously, the mainstream academic side. That's easy to spot. But they're also playing the alternative research spot. So like right now, for example, if I try to bring up phantom time, or I bring up the reality of chronology being wrong, like mainstream chronology being wrong, right? Even alternative people don't want to hear it because they have been psychologically conditioned to believe that the chronology is, for whatever reason, correct. Yeah, a lot of the other history is false, but no, they for sure got the real years correct. Right? This is what alternative people do. You go watch a lot of these alternative mainstream people, and they don't question anything with chronology. The only time that they might bring chronological views into scope is if they're trying to change a date that's pretty far out anyways. The pyramids are a perfect example, right? There's a whole huge movement right now trying to push the pyramids and the Sphinx out to like 10 to 15,000 years or more into the past. But nobody ever stops and goes, wait a second. Do we even know that the current chronology that we use, even for the modern time in the past 600 years, is correct? They don't bother with that because they honestly believe that the mainstream, even though it's wrong and everything else, that it is correct in chronology. And that's because of their psychological conditioning programming. Their ability to critical think has also been programmed out of them. And of course, another problem that you have to watch out for with respect to psychology is, and I touched on it a little earlier in the show, but when you're a kid, your brain is literally malleable, right? It's been described as like a plastic, as a clay, right? It moves, you can form it. If you've ever held a brain, it feels very interesting, right? You're like, huh, you would, it's not what you think it would feel like, but it is malleable. As you get older, that malleability slows down. And unfortunately, we are not above overcome. And unfortunately, we can't just overcome this. Your brain physically creates real world connections inside of your brain with respect to whatever it has been programmed to do. Once those connections are made, and as you get older, they really do start to solidify. And then once they solidify in you as an adult, and really, by the time you're like 19, 18, you can make an argument for, you're pretty much done psychologically, or at least what programmers would consider essentially locked in. Now, that does not mean you can't learn new things. That does not mean you can't change programming. Of course, all of that still goes on. But ultimately what happens is as you get older, you just get locked into what you could call your habits if you want. Basically, you're not going to change. And once you don't change, that means that it becomes infinitely more difficult for you to look at something brand new in a fresh light and then analyze it and come to a fresh conclusion. How often do you see that happen nowadays with older people? Right? It almost never happens, unfortunately. It's not that they can't do it. They can still come around. But most people don't, simply because of the biological aspect of psychological conditioning. So right now, when we look at the alternative side of all of this stuff, we find some of the older guys nowadays who are locked in to their very specific theory, and they're not really open to anything different. Right? Schock, Hancock, all these guys, they all believe in the mainstream chronology up, back until maybe a certain point to where they're willing to start to play around. But they do not question ancient Greece. They do not question, the medieval times. They question none of this because they honestly believe that it is correct, even though there is no scientific evidence for it. And in fact, there is nothing but evidence against it, or at least against the mainstream chronology being accurate basically at all at this point. It's an absolute joke. So we run into this situation on both sides, and that's one of the things that I wanted to make sure everybody is aware of. And you have to be on your guard, because I know sometimes theories sound really good, right? The alien thing. Aliens built the pyramids. Fantastic. Sounds great. But where's the evidence? I mean, where is the true proof? What really convinced you? There's a good chance that a psychological program was actually run on you that convinced you that this was the right thing. And then, of course, you just keep ingesting that specific kind of programming, and suddenly you are essentially an alien executable. You will not be any other kind of programming. So watch out for those traps. That's probably one of the biggest problems that we have right now in mainstream history, or in all of history, not mainstream, in everywhere. Everybody is essentially being divided and conquered. So we have to watch out for those pitfalls. Okay, yeah, I know, we got to wrap it up. So this is the point. When you are looking around at history, and you are looking to people to teach you, various aspects of history, reading a book, listening to a lecture, whatever, just make sure that you are well aware of where they may be coming from psychologically. Really look at what they're saying, and look at yourself, and look at how you're taking their information. Are you easily convinced by stuff that has had no real evidence? Right? That's a huge red flag. And I know that sounds obvious, but most people nowadays don't see that. As long as it sounds good and the person can make it sound complex, right? Oh yeah, it's true. Yeah, of course. This guy said all these big words. It must be real. That's all it takes nowadays. Proof is no longer needed. The proof is now in the authority. Right? So the reason why we're in this situation is because we have all been psychologically programmed. Me, you, your mom, your dog, whatever. Everybody has this in them. The hard part is trying to deprogram yourself. Now, when it comes to history, we can make the claim that we really do not know a whole lot. And things get even crazier when you add the fact that it appears that there were multiple cataclysms that absolutely wiped this planet clean several times only in the past few thousand, maybe 10,000-ish years ago. Maybe. I don't know the end date for that crap. But my point is that if these kinds of events truly happened, the catastrophic ones, if these events happened, then that changes everything. That changes not only history, but that changes modern people, because now we have to look at our environment and our ancestors completely different. And what it also would show us is that we actually do need to work together, because there's some really dangerous stuff out there. And while we might be sort of out of the woods right now as far as catastrophes are concerned, we're not completely safe. The main people up at the top don't want anybody to use those events as a rallying cry. And as well, it would change everything, right? It would change geology, it would change all the sciences. People would actually start having to, learn the truth, which could lead to, I don't know, who knows where, right? Because I don't have the whole truth right now. But if we were able to work together and get in that direction, could you imagine that? Like, that is exactly why psychological conditioning programs are run everywhere. And that is one of the reasons why they remain active in the historical arena. All right, that's it. I'm done. You guys, watch out for that stuff. It is so annoying to see intelligent people fall for the dumbest programming. And that, please believe that's what it is. Okay. All right. So go. Keep an eye on yourself. Monitor yourself. I'll do a show later of how you can maybe make some changes. We'll do that. I've talked long enough. Okay. You know what? I probably won't even post this video. Yeah. Just like, oh my god, an hour and 30 minutes of... Holy